Again, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. Before I get started with the second part, I want to sort of recognize two people, one of whom is here today, who are sort of the behind the scenes effort of all of your academic work at IoES, and without whom this program would be absolutely in shambles. None of you would graduate, and most of you would be in fetal positions for most of your time at UCLA. The first person would be Royce Diekman, who I hope many of you know. Royce was not able to be here today. He is the student affairs officer for the undergraduate program at IoES. And he is, I think, the most invaluable resource, whether you know it or not, that any of you have met during your time here. Royce works tirelessly to make sure all of you stay on track for your graduation requirements, make sure you can get the classes you need for your major and minor concentrations, help you with study abroad, internship and other programs, and Royce really deserves recognition and thanks, and we're extremely lucky to have him. The other person is Dr. Cully Nordby, who is the Associate Director of IoES, and really make sure that the very, very chaotically organized train station or train system that mostly has all the tracks intersecting and running directly into each other at UCLA for coursework, that all that works out, that you do have classes to take and instructors to teach them, and that the academic program grows and works the way it's meant to. And I cannot begin to describe the amount of work that's done to keep this program running. Please give a thanks to Dr. Nordby. Really cares about all of you. And with that in mind, I get to introduce Kelly now to talk about one of the highlights for today, which is the awards that we offer at IoES for our graduating senior class. And I'm going to let Kelly take that away. Please give her a nice welcome.
Thanks, Noah. And I am so excited to be here. This is I've told this to a few of you already, but this is my second favorite day of the year. Just seeing all of the incredible work, and I'm just so proud of all of the teams and the clients and the families and everybody that has supported our amazing graduating class this year. My favorite day of the year is actually graduation day, commencement, which is coming up. And for the first time, I think in 18 years, I will not be there because my own son is graduating college up at University of Oregon in Eugene. So I will be there in spirit, but I am here with you today. So very happy to be here. And I have the great pleasure of announcing the winners of our annual awards for the environmental science major. We have 2 awards. The first is the Academic Achievement Award that recognizes the student with the highest level of academic achievement in their cohort. This was an incredibly difficult decision. We have 16 seniors graduating with a 3.90 or higher. And I will first announce the 4 students who are receiving an honorable mention. All of these students have perfect grades, many A+. They're graduating with multiple majors or minors and have completed impressive research projects. So if you're still here, just please stand up to be recognized as I call your name. So these are the 4 honorable mentions. Leah Garcia. Carl Bravaro. Rhodes. And Lawrence Finn. And now I'll announce the winner of the Academic Achievement Award for 2025, and that is Joyce Go. We'll be recognized at graduation as well. And then our next award, our second award, is the Outstanding Service Award that recognizes a student who has shown exceptional engagement in environmental and sustainability issues outside of the classroom during their college career. In this category, we have 6 students who are receiving an honorable mention. And each student has made a significant impact within the community of the environmental science major at UCLA, or especially in the community beyond campus. So again, please stand as I call your name. Natalie Ashkar. Emily Dory. Michael Flora. Carl Favreau. Again. Grace Miller. And Faith. And there's our honorable mention. And now I'll announce the winner. Again, just stand up to be recognized. The winner of the Environmental Science Outstanding Service Award this year is Carol Lupita. Congratulations to all of you and all the rest of you who I also know are amazing at equity and in the community. So thank you very much.
All right, with that, and a very well-deserved congratulations to all of you, and really to all of you who are graduating this year. This has been just an outstanding achievement to get to this point. With that in mind, I'm going to introduce our first project for the second phase of our presentations. And if the team from the Natural Resources Defense Council looking at stormwater capture could come up, we'll let you take it away.
Okay, hello. We are the team working on guidelines for the effective capture and use of stormwater for infiltration and irrigation in California, and we've been working with the Natural Resources Defense Council on our project. So to start off by introducing ourselves, my name is Margaret. I'm joined presenting by Eric and James, and this is the rest of our team. And then we've also been working with Mark Gold, who is both our advisor and our client for this project. So to give some background on water in California, you've heard it from a few groups, but as climate change continues to affect our country and the state of California specifically, our water scarcity issues are only going to worsen and become a greater issue for the state. So a way that we can lessen the effect of these issues is through the use of other underutilized resources such as stormwater. Stormwater is free, it comes from the sky, but right now it is incredibly underutilized because there's no standardized framework for the use of this resource. Across the state, there are 9 different regional boards which control the use of the stormwater, and they have varying levels of regulation around its use. For example, in LA County, where we reside, the regulations for it are extremely strict, making it incredibly difficult to utilize, but in some areas there's no framework whatsoever. So the goal of our project has been to standardize this framework across the state and make it much easier to utilize stormwater, and through the impact of that, up climate resilience overall, and increase local water usage. So the research question that has been guiding our project is, how can we best utilize collected stormwater in California and ensure that there are guidelines regulating its use? So we've gone about this with a couple of different methods. The first being subdividing our team into 4 different sub-teams, which have been working on different aspects of our project, which we'll touch on throughout the presentation. We've also spoken with experts from across the country, some from EPA Washington, others from the Midwest, and some right from California with the State Water Resources Control Board. And then also using existing legislation, guidelines, and other successful projects as the framework for how we can be creating these regulations and guidelines for the use of stormwater. The overall goal of our project has been to output the different aspects that each of the sub-teams has been working on, including different documents, which we'll touch on in a second, as well as a bill called AB 638. So to get a little bit more into what our sub-teams have been working on. First, our legislation team has been working with Celeste Rodriguez to draft AB 638. This bill's goal is to standardize the usage of stormwater through guidelines across the state as a whole. This is going to make it much easier to utilize this underutilized resource right now. So what we have been doing as team members working on this kind of aspect of the project is doing lots of the behind the scenes work, drafting up the guidelines that they're going to need to base this bill off of, and then also gaining support for the bill across the state from different NGOs and governmental groups. Some really exciting news is that this bill just passed through the Assembly and is moving on to the Senate. If you know anything about legislation in California, that is a huge accomplishment, and we're really, really excited that it should be finalized by September.
All right, so another key component of our report, on top of AB 638, has been to create our own guidelines for stormwater reuse for irrigation in urban areas. So you might think like golf courses, cemeteries, or public parks. As a reminder, one of the main reasons that this project exists in the first place is because in LA County, they currently have extremely excessive guidelines to the extent that stormwater that's being used for irrigation is being held to the same standards as drinking water. And what this has done is this has killed off pretty much all or many of the ongoing projects that are happening, leaving millions of dollars in stranded assets, as well as prevented future projects from being proposed. In addition to this, as Margaret mentioned, there is no consistent guidance at the state, which is why LA County could do this in the first place. And so what our group has done is we've created these two sort of matching reports to hope to directly fix, or at least help fix, these issues at both the state and the county level. Our first report is going to the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health. And this has sort of alternative, more appropriate standards and practices. And also, so this is sort of a shorter report that could actually be directly implemented like today into the existing guidelines. Our second report is going to the California State Water Resources Control Board, which is a more comprehensive framework. And the goal for this is to ensure consistency across the entire state. And something also to note is that this guidance is actually what the state will need to do to comply with AB 638. So we're essentially doing a lot of their work for them. So our reports were primarily based off of a few documents. The first two were California State Title 22 and EPA 2012 federal guidelines, which both had suggestions for the use of recycled wastewater for irrigation. And we also found that Australia had some very solid guidelines, specifically for stormwater. And so based on these documents, what we've sort of done in our reports is we have created sort of recommendations for these potentially large-scale stormwater capture systems in order to reduce public health risks by lowering exposure to pathogens. Some examples of this are recommendations for treatment, recommendations for backflow or cross-contamination prevention. There's monitoring, and there's a whole bunch more that I won't get into now, but feel free to ask questions at the end. So what is the current status of these reports? We've actually currently already sent them to both the LA County and the State Water Resources Control Board and received feedback from the state. And they're pretty much finalized by now, and we're hoping that they can get implemented as soon as possible.
All right, the next part of our project focuses on the use of stormwater for infiltration. And infiltration is when we take this collected stormwater runoff and we're putting it down into groundwater, filtering it through the soil to be stored. Groundwater is a crucial water resource in California. It's a naturally occurring water resource, but unfortunately in California, we've overdrafted and overused this resource. So now we need to turn to stormwater infiltration as a solution to this to start refilling and replenishing these depleted wells across the state. A concern of stormwater is it can be very polluted, as when it goes across surfaces, it takes the contaminants on those surfaces. So the first part of our guidelines was an assessment of whether the contaminants in stormwater could also be a contaminant to groundwater. So we did this based on if the contaminant was toxic, if it's abundant in stormwater, if it's immobile in soils, and or persistent in soils. We found that heavy metals, organic contaminants, or nutrients pose the most risk. In our report, we include a recommendation to use nature-based solutions, or NBS. And a nature-based solution is one that takes advantage of soil's natural hydrology to remove pollutants, while also providing a community benefit, such as reduced urban heat island, increased green space, or flood control. And here's some California examples of projects like these on the screen. In our report, we also include guidance on the necessary distance between the site of infiltration and the depth of groundwater, setbacks from the project itself and drinking water wells, as well as guidance on how to size these projects and guidance on assessing the soil type at the project site, and then potentially modifying the soil type to increase its ability to remove pollutants. One of our biggest findings from our project was that there's absolutely zero groundwater quality monitoring data for projects like these. Some projects have been infiltrating stormwater for over 60 years, and that's thousands of acre feet per year. We have no idea how it's impacted the quality of groundwater. So moving forward, we need to close this gap to make sure that we're not affecting public health or deteriorating groundwater quality across the state. And finally, as we leave today, we want you to know that our group will have closed this gap in state legislation with AB 638, and this will allow stormwater to no longer be a wasted resource, but instead provide local water supplies and support urban green spaces. Additionally, our reports on infiltration and irrigation can and should be adopted by the State Water Resources Control Board to enhance water supplies and enhance climate resiliency for California's future. Thank you.
So I'll open up to questions, but I do want to point out, just for those of you who really aren't aware of the full experience of working with the California legislature, attempting to get a bill seen and passed and shepherded through is really a perfect opportunity to go straight through the looking glass into Wonderland, or maybe a better version, sort of more modern, is into the upside down. It is a absolutely labyrinthine, completely just challenging process to do, and the fact that students have gotten a bill to the point that it's, let alone being looked at by the Assembly, but has passed through the California Assembly, is just staggering and really warrants a lot of congratulations for that. So with that note, though, I'd like to open for questions about this approach. And yes, please.
Just wondering how we'll be able to isolate those top three. I think you said contaminants, heavy metals, so on. There were top three. How were we able to isolate that those were contributing factors to contaminants?
Like James said, we looked at whether contaminants were toxic, so whether they could pose public health risks, and if they were abundant in the stormwater. So contaminants that had higher concentrations in stormwater were less likely to be filtered out of the soil. And then also we looked at the mobility of those contaminants in soil. So what were the processes that removed the contaminants and how effective were they based on normal concentrations in stormwater? And then we also looked at how persistent they were in soil. And so that's how we came to the conclusion of heavy metals, organic contaminants, and nutrients, because they satisfied all of those 4 requirements. And yeah, we concluded that they could have a potential to impact groundwater quality.
Yep.
I'm curious what the barriers have been to improving our management of stormwater in the past, because we've been in a drought on and off for the last couple of decades. So, you know, in your estimation, why is it taking to 2025 to do that? And what does that tell you about the barriers to getting this implemented at the state levels?
I think I can take this, and I can think of 2 main reasons to start off with. As we talked about, stormwater has been seen in the public eye as a dirty water resource. And in that sense, people haven't wanted to use it. People have been scared to use it because of potential risk of pathogens. And then the second reason is, this is straight from the State Water Resources Control Board, is that they've kind of put this off, even though they want to do it, because they focused on recycling toilet water instead of stormwater, because that infrastructure is already in place. So rather than kind of start a new subject, they're going to what they already have available. Those are 2 reasons for that.
Just a quick question. So you walk around the west side of LA, and when you see new houses going in, you oftentimes see little, what I assume are sort of little local infiltration basins, water filtration basins, you know, in the front yard of the house. In every house I look at, I see it now. I'm assuming that's what those are for. And if so, can you give us a sense of how those sort of individual, very small scale basins function or contribute to this problem compared to, you know, to larger infrastructure?
Well, so that kind of project would be described as rainwater harvesting when it's happening at like a local house on site. And because it's on site, you have a much lower risk for contaminants. And so we're not as concerned about that. But when we're looking at a large scale in a city, a municipality, it has a lot more pollution. It's running on surfaces, sidewalks, and streets that are contaminated And so that's a key difference. And so if you are doing that at your house, you're contributing you're not relying on other potable water, so that's a great offset. But as a statewide impact, we need this to be at the larger scale, and that takes mitigation of pollution.
I think also those help a little bit more with water quality rather than water quantity concerns. So it just helps like runoff from cities going through that, removing pollutants in general so they don't make it to surface waters. But I don't think it's as helpful in supplying the overdrafted groundwater basins.
Thank you.
I think those were excellent answers, and one thing I'll build on to that is that, really, I mean, from a water quality perspective, 1 inch of rainfall in Los Angeles can send 10 billion gallons of water down the LA River with all the contaminants that are washing off our city streets and parking lots and sidewalks. And so one of the goals of that type of project is that any new development should act like the undeveloped environment, that we shouldn't be producing runoff. And so small scale, it probably doesn't produce much in terms of water supply, as Carmen pointed to, but it can do a lot to reduce the pollution that develops from runoff. Excellent. So our next team, looking at a very different pollution issue, is a team working with the California Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment on air quality issues surrounding warehouses. And I'll have that team come up and please give them a nice welcome. Crashing traffic. I think space.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are the Office of Environmental Health Hazards Assessment Team, and today we're going to be presenting our findings on warehouse-related emissions in Southern California. So this is our team and our advisor, Professor Saide, and our OEHA client partner, Laurel Plummer, with whom gave us the privilege of presenting our findings to OEHA and CARB staff yesterday as well as today. So as warehouses, as fast shipping and ultra convenience arise in the United States, more warehouses have sprung up to meet this crazy demand. This requires more truck trips to move goods around to and from all of these warehouses. This heightened respiratory and cardiovascular risk from PM 2.5 exposure. And so by electrifying the zero emission trucks, we are able to decrease these risks. So our project focuses around 2 research questions. The first is, how does the distribution of warehouse locations disproportionately impact the air quality and health of racially and socioeconomically marginalized communities? And 2, how can the electrification of heavy-duty diesel trucks improve the quality and health of communities living in close proximities to these warehouse locations? Our project is concerned with 3 pieces of legislation. The first is the WARE program, which is a point-based system incentivizing warehouses to report and reduce emissions. The second is ACF, which stands for Advanced Clean Fleets. This mandates that 100% of heavy-duty trucks in CARB-regulated fleets must be transitioned to zero-emission vehicles by 2042. And the third is ACT, which stands for Advanced Clean Trucks. This requires manufacturers to ensure that at least 40% of new heavy-duty truck sales are zero-emission by 2042. The figure on the right here shows the difference between ACT and ACF, and you can see here the emissions drop pretty drastically under the ACF regulation. So these 3 pieces of legislation form the basis of our project scenarios. So these are our 5 project scenarios. The first scenario forms the baseline scenario of current day Southern California without any emissions reductions due to regulations. The second scenario factors in the WARE program on the baseline emissions, which will estimate how mitigation actions will reduce pollution on top of the baseline scenario. The third scenario projects ZEV adoption under CARB's ACF rule with a fleet composition of 100% ZEVs being achieved in 2042. And scenario 4 follows CARB's ACT rule and assumes 46.1% of ZEV adoption by 2042. The last scenario assumes that no ZEV mandates are adopted and that fleets remain primarily powered by internal combustion engines by 2042. This is a very relevant scenario for today because recently in May, the Senate voted to overturn California's ZEV mandates for trucks and for passenger cars.
To give you an overview of our
methods. We use the publicly available warehouse city data to obtain warehouse locations and size information. We then proceeded this dataset in RStudio to generate our emissions file for each of our scenarios for the 5 pollutants we're analyzing: PM2.5, NOx, SOx, NH3, and VOC. Next, we use the EcoAir model in Jupyter Notebook to simulate air quality impacts. EcoAir is especially useful in estimating both secondary PM2.5 emissions and associated health impacts. And finally, we use the outputs from EcoAir along with Cal Environment data screen dataset to conduct an environmental justice analysis in RStudio. This helped us assess how air quality may disproportionately affect communities that are already vulnerable. And now looking at the results, Cal Environment Screen score reflects cumulative environmental and social burdens, where higher score indicates more vulnerable communities. As shown here, areas such as Los Angeles, Pomona, Ontario, and Riverside have clusters of high vulnerability. These tracts are often surrounded by similarly disadvantaged neighborhoods, reinforcing regional concentration of vulnerability. In scenario 1, population-weighted PM2.5 exposure spans a wide range. But even at these low concentrations, long-term exposure can still contribute to serious health impacts. 3 major exposure hotspots emerge. Number 1 here, San Bernardino to Riverside. Number 2, South and East LA. And number 3, Lake Forest. These areas align closely with both warehouse activities and high social vulnerability. Under scenario 3, which models full zero emission truck adaptation by 2042, PM2.5 exposure drops dramatically. Most areas fall within the lowest concentration range, and even the hotspots are greatly reduced compared to scenario 1. This highlights the significant public health and equity benefits of aggressive CED adaptation.
Okay, so now let's look at a bar chart that shows the population-weighted PM2.5 concentrations for each scenario. So first here we have scenarios 1 and 2, our base, and the other one, scenario 2, showing the impact of the WARE program. And as we can see, there's only a slight difference between the two, basically telling us that the WARE program does not have a huge impact on emissions. And then so now let's look at the bar graph for scenario 4, our ACT regulation, and how this looks between 2035 and 2042. So here the green bar represents our projection for 2035, and then the purple for 2042. And as we can see with the ACT regulation, we only see a slight decrease in the concentration between our base year and our future projected years, which more or less suggests that the current regulations do not necessarily reduce, but only keep emissions from worsening. And then now let's look at scenario 5, which is again our scenario without any regulation. And as we can see, there's obviously this huge increase in emissions, and through both years, 2035 and 2042, compared to our current emissions. Again, emphasizing this importance of having any sort of regulations, because without them, it would only exacerbate exposure over time. And then finally, let's go back to scenario 3, which again is the most aggressive scenario. Again, having that widespread 100% ZEV adoption. And there's this huge decrease in emissions compared to the rest of the scenarios, showing the effectiveness that this regulation has on the outcome of emissions. And then now finally, let's look at the population-weighted PM2.5 emissions per scenario and compare them to our Cal Envirus screen quartiles. Specifically, this graph focuses on quartiles 1, which is the orange, and then quartiles 4, which is the purple, which coincide with the highest and lowest burden communities due to the socioeconomic and health factors. Quartile 1 being the lowest impacted, and then quartile 4 being the highest impacted. And from this graph, it's important to note that the percent difference between the most and least burdened communities, quartiles 1 and 4, remains at least a baseline of 64%, and it even gets to around 76% in our scenario 5, which is again our scenario without any regulation, basically indicating the persistent or growing inequality in emission exposure. Now, notably in scenario 3, with 100% ZEV adoption by 2042, it shows the greatest reduction in emissions for both quartiles, and it's especially notable to look at that there is a 91% decrease for the most impacted communities. Again, this underscores the need for targeted policies that both reduce emissions and address equity. And finally, we have a couple recommendations for our project. Just for time's sake, the most notable ones are we would want in the future to expand our project to statewide analysis. And then we would also like to conduct real-time monitoring to validate models and track progress. But yes, this concludes our findings for the project. If you have any questions or recommendations, we'd be happy to answer them.
Questions from the audience? Yeah, no, please.
Yeah, so, thinking about like the long-term effects of using so many batteries for these EV trucks, was there any analysis or studying to do? What about the disposal of them, and where would the disposals be, and what impact the environment would that be?
So for our project, we didn't focus on like disposal of ZEV batteries. That was outside the scope of our project. But I can tell you we did still look into like ZEV trucks still do produce PM 2.5 like PM 2.5 emissions through like brake wear and tire wear, and that's something we looked at. But yeah.
So why is the Inland Empire so high? Why are San Bernardino rivers not so high? Is it just because there's more warehouses and more trucks? Or is it drift? Or is it, what is it?
So that's probably the highest concentration of warehouses in the state, in the Inland Empire. If you were to look at Google Maps on like a satellite view, it's pretty obvious how many warehouses there are, and they're not just these are very large warehouses too. So that's why you see the highest concentrations of emissions there. Is simply just because that's where the most warehouses are.
It's not the air patterns.
And also it's where land is available and you have the highest growth rate of warehouses. I mean, it's just astounding how much infill is going on there. Yeah.
Are there any, I mean, how, do you know what percentage of the fleet is electric truck at this point? Any, is 0% or is it more than that?
Six.
Yeah, 6.1%.
Really?
Yes.
Is that largely used in more local transportation or is that long haul trucking, if you know?
It's in heavy duty trucks. I think that's the best way I can do that.
Yeah, excellent. All right, well, thank you so much, team. This is. Okay, and speaking, continuing with themes of sustainability and land use, our next project team is going to be working with the Socially Responsible Agriculture Project, looking at antibiotic resistance from CAFO operations.
Hi, thank you all for being here today. We are partners with SRAP, the Socially Responsible Agriculture Project. Here's our lovely team. And before we get started, we'd like to define a few important terms that will help set the stage for what we're going to be discussing today. Within the animal agriculture industry, large-scale facilities that raise high numbers of livestock, in our case cattle, are called concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs. Because these sites house so many animals in such close quarters, they produce a lot of manure, which is just as glamorous as it sounds. To manage this waste, many of these CAFOs use systems called digesters, which break down the manure and convert it into a usable methane fuel. CAFOs are also known to frequently use antibiotics on their livestock to prevent the spread of disease as well as treating illnesses. Over time, this heavy use of antibiotics promotes the development of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, or ARBs. Here's how this happens. So when bacteria is exposed to antibiotics, most are killed, but some mutated resistant bacteria remains. And these resistant strains can then multiply and transfer their resistance to other bacteria. Eventually, they can make their way into the surrounding environment via air, water, and soil. This brings us to our research.
We investigated the presence of antibiotic-resistant E. coli in surface water near CAFOs in Tulare County, California, which is home to 11% of the country's dairy digesters. This issue goes beyond environmental health, but it's also a concern of environmental justice. Communities that surround these CAFOs are predominantly lower income, Hispanic and Latino, and made up of farm worker populations, which are groups often facing greater health and environmental concerns and burdens. We conducted this research under the guidance of Dr. Jennifer J. and PhD student Yuhui Zhang, whose guidance and support helped bring our project together.
So for our research project, we had two main topics. The first was to compare resistance profiles in E. coli in surface waters and compare them in different proximity to CAFOs and digesters. And the second was to assess IDEX coli 8 as a potential screening tool for multidrug resistant E. coli or MDR-EC. And just to note, multidrug resistant E. coli means that E. coli is resistant to 3 or more antibiotics.
Okay, so on the screen now you have two different maps. The one on the left is just showing you where Tulare County is relative to the rest of California. The one on the right is showing you where our 10 sample sites are in the blue stars. Those red diamonds are going to be where your digesters within Tulare County are, and then the gray dots are the CAFOs. Tulare County is going to be the right side of that border. So we chose these sites, and the choosing of these sites was super important and also a little bit difficult. They had to be near a waterway, and that waterway needed to have water, which definitely limited us sometimes. Additionally, it needed to be accessible from public land, so not somebody's farm or agriculture facility. So something like a public park or a bridge or a highway. And so, although there aren't a lot of sites, each site had a multitude of isolates that we took from them in order to study. So instead of having a more like regional overview, we were able to take a deep dive into each one of the sites.
Like Caitlin just said, we sampled from 10 different waterways near CAFOs. On our sampling trips, we took pH, temperature, and turbidity. Each of our sample trips we took had different numbers of sites we took from because of seasonal variations and conditions out of our control. So after we came back to the lab, we had to do some further analysis. A lot of these tests were time sensitive, which meant that this all happened in one day. The sampling team would leave at 4 a.m. and then the lab team would be in lab until 9 p.m. So we had some really, really long days. We also tested for nutrient and conductivity and prepped for IDEX and our MDR tests. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is IDEX analysis, which is a one-day test. So we tested 5 antibiotics at both intermediate, which was 10 microliters, and resistant levels, which is 100 microliters. We tested these in raw solution, 1 to 10 dilution, and 1 to 100 dilution. We poured each of these samples into the trays that are seen on the left, and then incubated them for 24 hours. After this, we calculated the most probable number of total coliform E. coli and calculated the percentage of antibiotic resistance for individual antibiotics. We also did traditional MDR testing, which was a lot longer, a few months compared to a few days. The bulk of our project was done in the lab, but we'll spare you the hours and hours we spent every week in our lab. So for each of the sampling sites, we isolated 80 colonies, and for each of those colonies, we had to purify 3 times, which is shown in the picture above. After that, we had to test for viability of E. coli by doing an indel test. And then after that, we performed a Kirby-Bauer disc diffusion test, which is shown on the bottom. We tested 11 antibiotics and measured resistance for each isolate for every site.
So these are our results. On the bottom there are all our samples grouped by the location of them, abbreviation, and then colored by the sampling date. So if they have the same color, they were collected on the same day. The higher the bar, the higher percentage of the bacteria collected in the water has multi-drug resistance. So you can see on the left is our clean site. These were collected in the Sierra Nevada, far away from the farming communities, and they show our expected results for bacteria, 0% multi-drug resistance. Meanwhile, on the right, you can see lots of different levels of multi-drug resistance. Some are up to almost 30%, others are just a few percent, but these are just a subset of our samples. We have more farming samples that are not hidden on this graph, and all of them show some level of multi-drug resistance. So yeah, we have a problem in our farming communities. Now that we found multi-drug resistance, we also realized that finding MDR was a really labor-intensive task, as Emmy talked about. So the second part of our research project was what if we use one antibiotic to predict multi-drug resistance? So leads to our second graph. Each line represents an individual antibiotic, and we want to see if the resistance of an individual antibiotic can predict multi-drug resistance. And we only had one antibiotic that had a strong relationship, that is TE or tetracycline. The light blue line over there had an R-squared value of 0.8 and a p-value of less than 0.01. So a statistically significant correlation. And this graph is using the distribution method. We did the same thing with the IDEX method. The x-axis is the percent antibiotic resistance using IDEX, and the y-axis is multi-drug resistance. And again, TE, tetracycline, the light blue line, had the strongest correlation. The other antibiotics did not show this strong correlation though.
Okay, so our final conclusions, MDR E. coli was absent at the clean sites, but reached up to 29%, as Lawrence just said, at our CAFO impacted sites. And end goal, we would have liked to be able to have a modified IDEX protocol that would be a quick way to test for multi-drug resistance. However, we weren't quite able to do that due to our small data set. With more data, modified IDEX may become a cost-effective and scalable tool in the fight against antibiotic resistance. Again, there are more antibiotics to be tested and more data to get, so we're super excited to see what could happen in the future. And lastly, TE resistance strongly predicts MDR E. coli. So again, more testing is needed. We do think that there is still an opportunity for IDEX to become a standardized field practice to quickly test for multi-drug resistance in surface waters. And this is just going to help streamline water quality testing in these CAFO impacted areas, and also just bring light to the public health problem that is occurring in these areas. We'd like to really thank Dr. J and Yuhui for their support and mentorship in the last year. We're incredibly grateful for this experience.
Excellent. Any questions from the audience? Yeah, please.
I just have a quick question as to what was the consideration of the antibiotics that were chosen? Are they just the most common, or is it just is there a specific reason why you chose the ones that you tested?
So we performed our first round of our NDR results, and the ones that had we plotted each of the individual resistance against total MDR, and the ones that had the highest resistance are the ones that we chose to test in our next round for IDEX.
That as well. One of the antibiotics that we used was CTX, or we also it's an antibiotic that specifically the World Health Organization recommends to test for beta-lactam protein-like production in proteins, which is one of the most concerning kind of public health concerns that we're seeing in CAFOs and in other watersheds, not only in Tulare County but also around the world as well. And so we mainly were using that as a control to try to see if that correlates. And as our data showed as well, CTX, which was recommended by the World Health Organization, is not that good of a predictor for other antibiotics as well. So we mainly use CTX as our control, but we were testing a variable amount of antibiotics, and it's still increasing. Dr. J and Yuhui are endlessly trying new antibiotics that are up and coming in the CAFOs industry.
The question in the back, yeah.
So, are you planning on publishing this? Is this going to be submitted as a research paper?
Yeah, some of us hope to continue the project over the summer to just keep working on the paper and publish it, but that's still variable depending on if the click or get more money. But some of us will volunteer too, so we'll see how it goes. We'll talk with you and Dr. J about it.
There's another question right here, yeah.
How fast was IDEX then conventional application?
Sorry, the question, how fast was the IDEX converted? Yeah.
So IDEX are just one day. We put them in the incubator for 24 hours, and then we could calculate that number right away. MDR, we had to go through many rounds of purification and then preservation and a bunch of other protocols to just get those same results or similar results.
That's how many days?
For MDR, do you know?
I mean, I think that we could get it down to 7 active days. However, with availability of students and midterms in life, it definitely took longer than that at times. Also depended on the amount of sites that had water after a sampling trip. So if we were planning for 6 sites, but only 4 of them, or if we were planning for 6 and then we ended up with 8, that would affect the amount of work that all needed to happen at the same time. And each one, again, we were doing the process of many steps that Emmy just described for 80 different isolates, and then multiply that by the amount of sites that we collected for that trip. So active work, you could probably get it done in a week. we definitely didn't get it done in a week every time. By the end, we were definitely more efficient though.
And then to add as well, I think one of the most concerning things too was that when trying to estimate how much of antibiotic resistance was actually being reported in Tulare County, there wasn't much that we were finding. And so one of our goals of our project as well is that in hopes in validating the IDEX method, we would be able to recommend to scientists and other public health advocates that there is an innovative method out there that can be used to identify the problem, to quickly address it, rather than spending so much time in lab and expecting communities within Tulare County to try to investigate this when we can provide this method for them to actually tackle the problem itself.
So thank you so much, Tim. Nice job. So our next team is working with the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, also in the Central Valley on disparities in investment in Merced.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you all for being here today. We are the team working with the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, and we'll be looking at differences in public health and environmental impacts in North and South Merced. This is everyone on our team, including our wonderful advisor, Emma. So as for some background to our project, Merced is a city in the San Joaquin Valley in Central California that has a long history of racially discriminatory land use and housing policies that has created segregated neighborhoods and spatial inequality. This is still very prevalent today in Merced, as seen through the unequal distribution of resources, investment, and health outcomes between North and South Merced. Our project is specifically wanting to look at how these inequalities may be exacerbated by the proposed industrial park plan, which is a plan to add and expand industrial zones in Merced, and how this could worsen the health and environmental impacts that are already present in South Merced. We're also wanting to look at how there's disparities in investment across the two sides of Merced, specifically looking at access to food, parks, and public services, as well as neighborhood safety and governmental support. So our hope is that this project will inspire alternative community investments, specifically ones that prioritize the well-being of residents and really engage the community input of the residents instead of just relying on the industrial park plan. So with all of this, we're asking two main questions for our project. To what extent do investment differences between North and South Merced relate to disproportionate access to resources, public health outcomes, and exposure to environmental risks? And how are these discrepancies correlated to the socioeconomic backgrounds of community members?
So to gain a comprehensive understanding of some of these public health and environmental inequities in Merced, we use a mixed methods approach. Our primary methods included expert interviews with UC Merced professors and key stakeholders. We conducted door-to-door outreach. We conducted a community focus group and sent out online surveys as well to gather qualitative and quantitative data. And we also conducted site visits to be able to observe some of these conditions firsthand, and also use online resources available to us, notably CalEnviroScreen and the Merced Housing Needs Assessment, to contextualize some of our findings with existing data. And ultimately, these efforts culminated in a few key deliverables. Firstly, our academic paper, and then we also created a ArcGIS story map to highlight some of the park inequities between North and South Merced, a policy memo with some actionable recommendations specifically directed towards the industrial park plan, and a fact sheet to promote more community engagement.
So there's two main results from our survey that we'd like to highlight: access to quality parks and access to food. For parks, residents identified concerns across 5 categories: accessibility, safety, aesthetic concerns, lack of park programming, and overall satisfaction. These categories were developed based on common issues raised by the community in our conversations with people. We received 6 total responses from North Merced and 26 responses from South Merced. Over half of South Merced residents reported accessibility issues like lack of lighting, sidewalks, or bathrooms, while none were reported for North Merced. Safety concerns were also more common in South Merced, with 26% of residents reporting them, nearly double the rate in the North. North Merced respondents were also more likely to raise aesthetic concerns, while South Merced residents focused more on basic needs like access and safety. And only South Merced residents reported lack of park programming. Nearly 70% of residents in North Merced reported no issues at all in their parks, compared to 100% of South Merced residents having at least one concern. The average walk time to parks for residents in North Merced was 26.3 minutes and 42 minutes for South Merced. This 15.7-minute travel time difference implies that South Merced residents have less convenient access to desired public spaces and hinders their engagement in recreational activities. In our conversations with North Merced residents, they described their parks as the upkeep being pretty good and said they can't complain. South Merced residents, on the other hand, described them as dirty, unclean, and said the ones that they'd seen around here were not too appealing. These differences reflect broader patterns of underinvestment and uneven public resource distribution. Similar disparities appeared in our results on food access. In North Merced, 2/3 of respondents said they were satisfied with food quality, and 1/3 said stores were located at a reasonable distance. No one mentioned being food too expensive or too far in North Merced, but in South Merced, over half of the respondents said food was too expensive, and over 20% said it's too far away. These are images that we took from our trip up to Merced that highlight some of the visual disparities in grocery stores, in quality of produce at grocery stores across North and South Merced. Rallies in North Merced had an entire aisle dedicated to lots of produce that was very aesthetically pleasing in quality, while the Shop and Save Market in South Merced, this image was basically the entire produce section, and the produce was more likely to be bruised or have marks on it. It was not as aesthetically appealing. One person said that they had to drive across town just to get fresh produce, and another said that they have more liquor stores than grocery stores in South Merced. Only 11% said that they were satisfied with the quality of food options. These challenges are compounded by limited transportation options and an overconcentration of fast food locations near schools like Merced High, as depicted on this map. Together, these trends show how structural inequalities in investment shape everyday experiences in South Merced, from parks to grocery stores, reinforcing broader disparities in health and quality of life.
So it goes without saying that despite some of our efforts, we did face a number of challenges and had some limitations in our research. Firstly, our sample size was small and uneven with fewer respondents in North Merced, and this might limit our ability to generalize some of our findings. The short duration of our visit also might limit our ability to have garnered wider community engagement. And lastly, we did face some language barriers, which forced us to rely on third-party Spanish translators to be able to effectively communicate with some of the residents. Nevertheless, these are areas that can prompt future areas of research and are just important to take into note when looking at our data.
Based on the research that we conducted, we developed 2 case studies to illustrate the challenges faced in Merced and how to move forward with them. The first one is referring to waste dumping in an unincorporated area of South Merced. This lot is technically owned by El Bajío, a local grocery store, and many residents that we interviewed highlighted this as an issue, first of all, as a public health concern, but second of all, as an opportunity for the creation of a grocery store and a community resource. However, it seems that bureaucracy, both based on our interviews with the city manager as well as former city council members, has inhibited the ability to make this into a productive resource for the Merced community in South Merced. Thus, our recommendation was that this be rezoned for commercial use, but this would require the buy-in of the government, which we often see has not occurred in South Merced relative to North Merced. Our second case study focused more on a high-level analysis of Merced by comparing its conditions to Fresno, California, another city in the San Joaquin Valley. We noticed that these 2 cities have very similar socioeconomic and historical divides that have led to very similar contemporary conditions. However, one main difference is the fact that Fresno, unlike Merced, has a very high rate of economic growth, whereas they tend to have a similarly high rate of unemployment. Conversely, in Merced, they have low economic growth and low employment. However, this demonstrates that the industrial park that's being proposed for development may not create new jobs in Merced and therefore will just compound existing public health issues. In summation, what we found through our research is that North Merced experiences much better public health outcomes and also better socioeconomic outcomes. As a result, pursuing this industrial park feasibility survey and implementing the industrial park will only worsen inequalities, and it will worsen the conditions, particularly for people in South Merced. But through the case studies and the data we've collected, we've seen potential ways to move forward in a productive manner that will help South Merced and North Merced experience better equity, but in particular, lift up South Merced and protect it from further environmental and public health harms. Thank you.
Questions from the audience?
A chance. Very last sentence. So if you project, you've got some ideas. then you-
Oh, yeah, please.
So this is something we elaborate a lot more on in our academic paper, which is one of our deliverables. But through the 2 case studies, we had kind of more specific and localized recommendations. So first, for the waste dumping case study, we suggest like kind of the main issue that we've identified is bureaucratic delays. So we spoke with the city manager and a city council member, and essentially there's this kind of discussion that goes on between the city and county where they ping pong issues back between each other and go, oh, well, this isn't our jurisdiction, it's in the counties, and then the county will say the same thing about the city. So seeing better cooperation between those 2 areas would be really helpful. And then when it comes to looking at Fresno as a comparison to South Merced and just Merced as a whole, what we really want to see is the halting of this development of the industrial park, because it doesn't seem like the creation of new jobs is necessarily going to help with the unemployment rate or the economic prosperity of South Merced.
I also want to add that something that we really highlighted, especially in conjunction with Leadership Council, was to really promote community education and engagement, and to get the community residents to feel comfortable enough to the point where they can voice their opinions and that they feel involved in that decision-making process. And things like our fact sheet that we created, and things like the Leadership Council does give a lot of platforms for community to become involved. And I think that's one of the cornerstones of being able to see progress.
Is that a way of couching the immigration issue?
I wouldn't think so. I don't think it would be. I think it is more just that there's longstanding issues in California just generally with disadvantaged communities having the ability to appear and engage in government process. And this is certainly an example of that. And so finding ways for residents to be able to engage is a critical aspect of any of these processes. Dan, yeah.
Yeah, really interesting insights. You've been studying parks throughout LA, and LA is obviously several times larger than Merced. Did you get any indication of why the parks were they managed differently in South Merced than North Merced? I mean, obviously the public perception is different, but when you went there, did you notice, did you yourself notice differences? Or did anyone let you know, like, do they just devote more staff to North Merced to fix them up, or what? Can you speak on that a bit?
Well, we elaborate this in our story map, just one of our deliverables, but yeah, we went to all the parks that the residents mentioned, and it was like very clear that the ones in South were much smaller, didn't have bathrooms, were like less upkept, and then in North, they had bathrooms that were open, water fountains that worked, and a lot more playgrounds. And that's kind of like what we're trying to like figure out why, because the South deserves just as much as the North, but the city definitely just does put more money into the North, even with the South like saying, hey, we want more resources, and it's just not happening.
Thanks, team. Oh, please.
Sorry. Also mention that our client goes to every single one of the city council meetings and has this like running document of all the investments that happen. And she has a subsection just about park investments. And we noticed that there's a lot fewer investments in the South. And when there is investments, it's on like repairs. And one of them was just to like rebuild this park that was burnt down. But in the North, they are like expanding parks, creating new parks, as opposed to just like regular repairs and maintenance.
Thanks very much. We'll look forward to seeing the rest of your report. Thanks, team. Okay, so our next section, we're gonna bring ourselves back to Los Angeles here, and we're gonna look at the environment and ecosystems surrounding LA and how we interact with development. And so please welcome our team working with the City of Los Angeles.
Good afternoon. We're the City of LA Plants Practicum team, here to present our results for developing ecotope-specific native plant lists and recommendations across Los Angeles' 16 ecological zones. Today we'll walk through our findings. I'm Miranda.
I'm Alina.
I'm Juliana.
I'm Maddie.
And Suli.
And then I'm Kika. Our team also includes Zainab and Hayden, and our advisor, Dr. Travis Longcor. Our client is the LA Department of Sanitation and Environment. So LA is a biodiversity hotspot with over 4,000 native species, but urbanization has fragmented the habitats here. Native plant biodiversity is key to resilient, low-input urban ecosystems, and LA's 16 ecotopes offer a framework for site-specific planting that restores ecological function. So what is an ecotope? We define it as a distinct geographic and ecological zone defined by its environmental conditions such as soil type, microclimate, plant species, and landforms. The city of LA is divided into 16 ecotopes, including riparian corridors, foothill scrub, and coastal terraces. So we made GIS integrated plant recommendations tailored to each ecotope based on historical flora, present-day conditions, and expert input. We're working to target the lack of accessible, ecologically appropriate native plant lists for the different environmental zones of the incredibly biodiverse city of LA. This knowledge gap has made it difficult for city, landscapers, and residents to plant a variety of native species appropriate to their specific area, which are crucial for biodiversity, water conservation, and climate resilience. So our question, how can LA residents, including planners, landscapers, and city staff, make ecologically smart planting choices rooted in the land's history and condition? Our goal, we also asked, can ecotope level plant lists help restore biodiversity and guide better landscaping? Our goal is to turn complex plant data into accessible recommendations. And by categorizing native plants into ecotopes for planting, we align with LA's Biodiversity Index and the Green New Deal. So for methodology, we research historical plant distributions from herbarium records. We assess current abiotic conditions, including like soil, sun, water. We also filter for ecological role, drought tolerance, and plant survivability. We merge historical plant presence with modern environmental data to determine which native plants still make sense in each ecotope today. We started with large plant databases and then filtered using slope, soil, sun, and water needs. We use GIS data, ecological databases, historical sources, and real-world validation. Our 4 steps include ecological history research, key suitability factors, GIS analysis, and field validation.
Our ecology team has completed plant recommendations for all 16 ecotopes. There are 2 lists of native plants for each ecotope, one which encompasses all plants which have been found to be suitable to grow in the ecotope, and the other is a more refined selection of plants which represent the distinct character of each ecotope. So our cumulative list of native vegetation for each ecotope were created using a variety of sources, which record the location, necessary conditions, and distribution of native plant species. We used Cowscapes, Gypsum Herbarium, and other large registries of California native plants to cross-reference maps of plant ranges, primarily sourced from the Consortium of California Herbaria, with the map we have of the ecotopes in Los Angeles to accurately identify where plants will be suitable. Additionally, as the city is urbanized and environmental conditions have shifted due to urban heat island, soil grading, and water draining, different native plants can exist where they previously did not. So as such, using iNaturalist can record these shifts in plant ranges and suitability for our list as a final step. Within lists, we include pertinent information such as scientific and common names, plant form, soil, sun, and water needs, as well as elevation and slope ranges. For our list of standout ecotope-specific recommendations, we went a step further in our investigation by emphasizing the historical landscape and ecology of each ecotope and the ecological value that a plant could add to the region. For an ecotope composed of alluvial plain and California grasslands and meadows, we really emphasized grasses and herbs in our recommendations, as well as like riparian tree varieties characteristic of a floodplain, for example. Finally, in our report, Above our ecotope standouts, we will acknowledge plants many Angelinos know and love, which can be found in the majority of ecotopes across Los Angeles and speak to the story of all of Los Angeles, but not just one specific area. These lists form the core scientific foundation of all of our deliverables.
So here are a few examples of recommendations for 2 specific ecotopes. The first one is Santa Monica Terrace, and a good tree for the Santa Monica Terrace is the Arroyo Willow, which is suitable for the elevation and the landform present. Another recommendation is purple needlegrass, which is California's state grass. Its deep roots are good for erosion control, making it suitable for this ecotop. And then lastly, a good shrub is the coffee berry, which is drought tolerant, pollinator friendly, and thrives in sandy, loamy soil, which is perfect for the nearby coastal conditions.
A second ecotope we talk about is the Western San Gabriel ecotope. Some plant recommendations include the interior live oak, which is more suitable due to the high elevations of the San Gabriels, as well as the highly drained soil there. Long stem buckwheat is also another one that is very drought tolerant and is additionally fit for the nutrient poor soil of the mountains. And then finally, the very striking hallmark species of the woolly blue curls is fire adapted, well suited to hot, dry summers, and provides habitat to a wide variety of native California species.
So transitioning to our GIS work, our team created foundational map outlines by clipping regional ecotopes to Los Angeles' city boundary. We successfully integrated elevation and soil topography data from USGS and USDA sources. For soil type and sun and water availability, we leveraged our studio to clean and restructure complex data sets. By handling missing values, standardizing formats, and optimizing attribute tables, we created user-friendly ArcGIS Pro compatible layers. While our initial concept featured ecotope maps displaying basic environmental characteristics and plant recommendations, we evolved the project into a filterable interface. This enhanced tool will allow the city to input their specific location and site conditions to receive planting recommendations that ensure plant survival. To conduct our fieldwork, we have investigated sites across Los Angeles, including existing remnant habitat and urbanized or restored areas, to gather a large sample of plants present in either environment. Our visits to both remnant habitats and urbanized areas have yielded several key insights. First, we've confirmed that many historical plant associations remain viable in less disturbed areas. Second, we have created a visual library of native plants in natural and urban conditions across LA, which assists in validating some key recommendations. By cross-referencing with other native plant needs, we can see which other species tolerate those current urban soil conditions. These observations directly inform our suitability criteria and ensure recommendations work in real-world scenarios. To recap, our analysis produced 3 key deliverables to support sustainable landscaping across Los Angeles' 16 ecotopes. First, a comprehensive report detailing native plant recommendations. Second, a series of spreadsheets, one per ecotope, containing complete plant lists with site-specific data. Finally, an interactive GIS map with layered ecotope boundaries and environmental variables paired with a filter tool. Together, these tools transform complex ecological data into resources. These resources will be given to the city, who will use it to make informed decisions and ultimately integrate the approved findings into their public databases. The City of Los Angeles plans to use these recommendations to inform their planting decisions throughout our city in order to increase biodiversity and ensure that plants will survive for many years to come. And finally, I'd like to thank our advisor, Dr. Travis Longcore, for his expertise and general humor. I'd also like to thank an IoES PhD candidate, Jared Kupfelt, for helping us develop our GIS work plan. Thank you so much.
Questions from the audience, but yeah.
Is there a way for land managers to access this now, or do you think the city will make it available?
So as part of our project, this will be initially handed over to the City of Los Angeles, Department of Sanitation, where they will do further refinements before they have told us they plan on integrating it into it's a unique part of Calscapes that's LA specific. So It won't be available now, but hopefully in the near future.
So, yeah. Just curious, did fire risk at all come into your thinking, or, I mean, it's sort of a conflict between what we'd like to have out there and what is a fire promoting ecosystem, but did you think about that at all? Or take it into account?
So originally when we began our project, it was obviously at the forefront of our minds because it was in January. However, when we discussed it with our client, they decided that we should focus more on soil and water and sun availability, and they would further refine it later. So it was not part of our project as much.
Nice work, guys. Well done. Okay, thanks everyone. So our next team is working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on a project on the species recovery for the El Segundo butterfly. And if you think that getting legislation passed through the California State Assembly and Senate is challenging, bringing a species back from the brink of extinction is truly noteworthy. So team, very happy to have you, and please take it away.
Less than 10 miles from here, in the dunes from Marina del Rey all the way down to the Palos Verdes Peninsula, is one of the smallest endangered species in the world, the El Segundo blue. Now, these butterflies are part of the California Floristic Province, one of only 36 biodiversity hotspots in the entire world, making their conservation especially impactful. Moreover, since its inception, not a single insect species has ever been delisted from the endangered species list. Our project is to evaluate whether or not the El Segundo blue could be the first, serving as a landmark for insect conservation and hopefully staving the species off from extinction. Thus, we're honored to present a pathway to the recovery of the El Segundo blue butterfly. I'd like to make some introductions. Our U.S. Fish and Wildlife representative is Dr. Eric Porter. Our faculty advisor is Dr. Travis Longcore. I'm Alex.
I'm Ryan.
I'm Gianna.
I'm Prashita.
I'm Eden.
I'm Kennedy.
I'm Megan. I'm Corinne.
Before we get into the details, a little bit of background information. The life cycle of the El Segundo blue butterfly, here known as the ESB, is highly specific. They feed on a single host plant, the sea cliff buckwheat, and they spend their entire life cycle circling around it. The ESB lays its eggs on buckwheat flower head, where as a caterpillar, it'll grow up eating the buckwheat before descending into the sand below. After a few months, it emerges as a fully formed butterfly, but only for 1 to 2 weeks, where it lays the eggs and the cycle begins anew. As you can probably imagine from such a highly specialized life history, degrading the dunes and the sea cliff buckwheat is analogous to harming the butterfly itself. As such, threats such as habitat loss from urbanization, invasive flora such as ice plant, as well as climatic factors such as droughts, can all significantly hamper the recovery of the El Segundo blue. As a result, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service designated the El Segundo blue onto the endangered species list in 1976, and while since then a lot of efforts have been made, there's still a lot of work to do. Here are the criteria that are required for the species to be considered stable. To downlist the El Segundo blue from endangered to threatened, first there must be a secure and permanently protected population within each recovery unit. Additionally, all 4 habitats must be managed with native vegetation and sea cliff buckwheat, and all 4 must show a stable or increasing trend for at least the next 8 years. Additionally, a public education program must be instated in order to teach the public about the El Segundo blue, as well as habitat. In order to delist the El Segundo blue from the endangered species list entirely, 4 additional secure and permanently protected populations must be included, and all of the other criteria must also apply. There are 2 parts to our project. First is evaluation, where we gather data, both legal and on the population. And second is recommendations, where we work with the US Fish and Wildlife Service to recommend the best course of action for eventually delisting the species.
So going back to our recovery criteria, the first demands that a securely and permanently protected population exists in each of the recovery units. In order to fully understand this, we needed to understand the legal mechanics of each of the recovery sites. So to do this, we identified all pertinent legal contacts, and then alongside all of supplemental documentation, we evaluated how all the sites held up to their criteria and noted any loopholes that would allow them to abstain from fully fulfilling their conservation duties. Based on this, we then identified all the necessary action that needed to be taken for each of the sites, using sites, especially those in Palos Verdes, as models for others. The second of the criteria demands that all the habitat that is within these sites be managed with native vegetation with a higher emphasis on seacliff buckwheat. To do this, our team conducted field assessments and cross-referenced our findings with satellite imagery to fully understand the full extent of the habitat and seacliff buckwheat in each of the sites. Additionally, our team also noted the condition of each of the habitat, especially the presence of buckwheat and also invasives such as ice plant. Based on this, our team formulated recommendations for improving habitat quality and used sites, especially those from the Torrance recovery site, as models for others as well.
To determine the recovery progress of each population for criteria 3, we analyzed all available survey data for all 10 sites. The graph on the right shows the history of the largest ESB population, which is found at the LAX Dune Preserve. We found a pattern where prolonged periods of drought resulted in decreasing populations across the board. A severe drought occurred in 2012 to 2016, which is shown in red on the graph, and as you can see, the LAX population suffered a steep decline during this period. However, the increase you see in the more recent years directly followed habitat restoration efforts. For all sites, successful habitat restoration has led to population increases and even the recolonization of new sites. Both patterns demonstrate a direct link between habitat quality and the overall condition of the ESB populations. During our analyses, we determined two important things regarding the species phenology, or the timing of its summer flight season. The points on this graph demonstrate the day of year that a peak observation had been made, where higher values indicate a later day. We found that populations in the southern sites, shown in blue, emerge earlier than those in the north, shown in red, by a difference of around 20 days. The second thing that we identified is that over time, the ESB as a species is emerging sooner. This graph illustrates a total difference of 30 days over the course of only 40 years. We determined that this drastic change is likely an effect of climate change, which is causing summer to occur earlier each year. These are both novel findings and have allowed us to expand our understanding of the ESB as a species and learn how to more effectively monitor its populations, which we'll go into further later.
The fourth and final of the recovery criteria demands that a public educational program is established for the community members to be involved. Currently, there are some successful endeavors that are established, including restoration events and long-term community restoration programs being undertaken by nonprofits such as the Friend of Idaho Wetlands and the South Bay Parkland Conservancy. Additionally, the Los Angeles Times has covered this butterfly a lot and has developed a strong online presence for it. Some areas that need improvement, though, however, are a strong outreach program and an incentive for outreach and a centralized network for that, as well as proper signage for trail and habitat prevention from disturbance. We also developed thorough site assessments that had details on the population status, the condition of the habitat, and all the legal protections for all of the sites that we looked at. Based on this, we also developed 5 key sites that had the highest potential for recovery. And based on that, we also developed guides for future conservation projects that will be used in the future. And finally, we also developed some recovery plan amendments, the biggest of which is the addition of the Palos Verdes Recovery Unit. This recovery unit would provide additional protection for the species, increase the current range of the habitat, and help preserve the unique genetic diversity and the overall species and health of the species as a whole. Based on this information, we are giving recommendations to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to update the recovery criteria to match ours to further streamline the downlisting and delisting process.
When going through the population data, we ran into several issues due to late surveys, gaps in survey years, and the inconsistent usage of survey methods. To address these problems, we created a standardized monitoring methodology that would allow data from all sites to be directly comparable. Surveys are to be conducted annually according to a specialized schedule for each site, created from our analyses where we estimated the peak of their flight seasons. By collecting reliable and consistent data, the recovery progress of each population can be more easily tracked to guide future actions. All of our research comes together to formulate a recovery strategy. We have devised a plan to allow for the ESB to make a full recovery within the next 10 years, to the point where it can be safely delisted from the endangered species list. The plan centers around accurately monitoring populations, solidifying protections for the known sites, restoring and managing habitat, and involving more of the community to further increase awareness and volunteer restoration efforts. If implemented accordingly, the ESB could become the first insect species to ever be delisted from the endangered species list. Oh, sorry. Enormous strides have been made over the past few decades, with widespread population increases and the recolonization of several sites, all thanks to grassroots restoration and conservation efforts. Our recommendations give U.S. Fish and Wildlife and landowners the framework that they need to continue this work in the most effective and focused manner possible. Ultimately, the team has found that the El Segundo blue butterfly has shown incredible resilience and has a great promise for a speedy recovery if only given the opportunity. If this highly endangered endemic urban butterfly can come back from the brink of extinction, it would set a hopeful precedent for the future of conservation during the time where we need it most. We would like to thank Dr. Eric Porter, Dr. Travis Longcore, and all other parties involved in making this project possible. Thank you.
Something hopeful for the future here. Questions, Ryan?
Maybe speak a little bit to, do you think any of the methods you developed could be generalizable? Like, let's say another group went out and looked at endangered species or something that was listed, and let's say a plant, obligate insect work. Was it so specific to El Segundo that you wouldn't be able to make recommendations, or did you kind of pick up lessons from the field that might be applicable to other systems?
I think that some of the recommendations that we made could be applicable to other species, but these were highly specific recommendations based on each site, based on specifically this species. But in general, yes, it could be applied to others.
Excellent. Well, thank you, team. This is really remarkable, and I'll look forward to seeing in 10 years when this gets delisted. So before I launch us into our last presentation here, which is something that's really, I think, I'm really excited about and was really thrilled to be part of this year, which is being related to UCLA itself, and I'll get to that in a second. I do want to thank one more individual here, without whom today really couldn't have happened. We have a live stream Zoom going. We have a website that was set up for this event. And in general, all your projects are going to end up on the IoES website with your final reports and data and everything else. And there's no way any of that could have occurred without the help of Scott Gruber. And I really want to thank him for along with Roy and Royce. I don't think any of you have any idea how much effort goes in behind the scenes towards really promoting and making your project special. And Scott's a huge part of that. And so thank you today for bringing this up. So with that, I'm going to launch into something that, as I said, I'm very excited about, which is a team of ours that has worked this year with UCLA's new South Bay campus, looking at what the potential for that campus could be as a sort of a shining harbinger of ecosystems for Los Angeles. And team, come on up. We're excited to have you present. Thanks so much.
Hello, thank you for joining us. We are the UCLA South Bay team, and this presentation will cover the biodiversity assessment that we have been conducting at the newly acquired campus over the past year. So in 2022, UCLA acquired the former Marymount College in Rancho Palos Verdes. This campus is set to focus on environmental justice, climate, and sustainability. So as the site transforms into a hub for environmental education, our work helps ensure that its ecological potential isn't overlooked. By documenting and restoring native biodiversity, we're not just protecting native species, we're rebuilding local ecosystems and our connection to nature. So our work takes place at two main sites. The first is the 25-acre main campus in Rancho Palos Verdes, and 6 miles away, it's the villas where the students would be living.
We used two complementary methods to inform our final biodiversity report. Field surveys were conducted to identify the current state of biodiversity, and species distribution models were created to identify and evaluate potential biodiversity.
And for our field surveys, we went out to each site and assessed vegetation, invertebrates, birds, and mammals. We used a variety of different methodologies tailored to each group, and this was all just to get a baseline biodiversity at each site. And for our vegetation, we collaborated closely with Dr. Anthony Benyaga, who is curator at the UCLA Herbarium. And together we came up with 2 distinct transect-based methods for each site. And at the main campus, we ran 4 transects, and at the villas, we ran 2 transects. All right, and our transects at the main campus basically revealed that non-native species absolutely dominate the landscape. We found a total of 21 non-native species and only 1 native species across all 4 transects, the arroyo lupin. And at the villas, as you can see, native species were a lot more common. Our transects revealed that deerweed and California buckwheat were the most abundant, followed by coyote brush, which is pretty rare. And we only found California brittle-bush just walking around, but we did not capture it in our formal transects.
As for the invertebrates, we surveyed 16 different sites following research from Dr. Longcourt. This helped us detect both ground-dwelling and flying insects. So the specimens were then surveyed by entomologist Rick Rogers, which gave us a better idea of what we actually caught. So why do we care about this? Well, invertebrates are actually a great kind of a monitoring way for us to figure out what biodiversity is actually existing on a campus. What role do they serve? They're pollinators, decomposers, and even food sources. So as you can see right here, there's the abundance curves on both of the sides. And they're mainly dominated by pillbugs and earwigs, which are both disturbance-tolerant species. So this pattern reflects a very simplified urban ecosystem with a lot of room to grow. However, we did detect native species such as the Serratina and Perdita bees, which are both pollinators.
To collect data on bird species composition and counts, we conducted expert-led walking surveys and used the Merlin Bird ID app to identify birds from acoustic recordings. Our survey results showed that the main campus had more birds both in composition and in count than the villas. At the main campus, there were 17 unique species of birds, 8 species at the villas, and the 2 sites had 18 species of birds in common. Although this may be a simple sampling artifact, the results, at least in part, reflect the differences in habitat at each site.
So another very fun part of our project was the wildlife cameras. We deployed 6 different wildlife cameras across both of the campus to detect mammal activity. They existed in different habitats, such as a manicured lawn in the villas or an overgrown gully area in the main campus. These SD cards were periodically captured and the species were identified. As you can see on the right side, there's an example of what our camera looked like, and there's a lizard on top of it that we unfortunately didn't capture on video. And here's an example of what the footage from the camera looks like.
Yeah, so our camera footage showed that the mammal communities are dominated by native urban adapters. At the main campus, the coyote and the desert cottontail were the most common mammals, while at the villas, it was the coyote and the striped skunk we detected the most. And a 1-week acoustic bat survey found 2 species of bats at the main campus and 3 confirmed species at the villas, including the western red bat, a California species of special concern.
And for our species distribution modeling results, we ultimately modeled for 136 species. And this is an example of what a spatially explicit map or model predictions look like. This one is for deerweed. Score closer to 1 indicates a higher suitability at that point. And for every single species, we extracted suitability scores at both the campus and the villas. And scores were usually pretty similar, as you see here with deerweed, but there were some exceptions. And using our model predictions, we determined that species with above a 0.9 habitat suitability have a high chance of success at each site. And this is just an example of what the unobserved species above that threshold, that 0.9 threshold at the main campus are. As you can see, a lot of them are native, and at the villas, this graph looks very similar. Now, using this list, we can make suggestions as to what species to include potential habitat restoration efforts.
So moving on to our discussion, we're going to start off with our limitations. So like most of the practicum groups here, our first is the time scale. We're only able to survey during the winter and spring months, meaning we missed the seasonal variation from a year-long project. Our traps may have also been biased towards mobile or larger invertebrates, as smaller ones might have been easier for us to miss. And then as for the cameras, overgrown vegetation was triggering false positive readings on the cameras, meaning we may have missed wildlife detections.
Restoring native habitat at both sites is one of our primary recommendations to South Bay administration. Our results showed that the main campus currently hosts little to no native plant diversity, but that it is able to support a large suite of plants typically found in native coastal sage scrub ecosystems. What we are working with is a blank slate, restoration-ready campus.
And at the villas, habitat restoration should center around the 4 native species that we found there: California buckwheat, California brillibush, the deerweed, and the coyote bush. We've already seen these species thrive there, and that indicates their potential suitability there and ability to support a healthy, resilient native ecosystem there.
We have also pinpointed 3 different threatened species that we hope to host on the campus one day. The first is the Palos Verdes blue butterfly, which relies on the deerweed and the rattlepod, which we aim to restore at the campuses. We hope to continue working with Dr. Jenna Johnson from Moorpark College in order to do annual releases and do pupae support. Our second is the coastal California gnatcatcher, which relies on a coastal sage shrub environment. We hope to have this at the main campus, which could then host up to 2 mating pairs. And as for the third one is the monarch butterfly that we so love. And we have spoken to the US Fish and Wildlife Service, and they have recommended that we plant nectar-rich native plants instead of something like milkweed, as this promotes healthy migratory behavior.
It's important to ensure that biodiversity is accessible to the students, staff, and visitors at UCLA South Bay. We are recommending that walking trails be placed through restored habitat, including plant signage, so that people can engage with and learn about the native species around them. And finally, this project is a work in progress. Our baseline biodiversity assessment was just the first step. Whether it's a future practicum project or something done by students at UCLA South Bay itself, long-term biodiversity monitoring is necessary to evaluate successful restoration and management practices, and it will keep future generations of students engaged in hands-on conservation work. Thank you guys for listening.
Questions from the audience about the incredible possibility for this property? Yeah.
They use a wide range of topographic factors, soil, climate variables. And we trained a machine learning algorithm to predict the suitability.
Questions? Yeah, Noreen.
Wonderful job. This is definitely going to be an impactful project for UCLA. I'm curious on the plants, did you end up, so seeing just the one native plant or lupin, was this just transects of that hillside area, or did you also document separately cultivated plants on campus? Because I know there are a few natives like some buckwheat and ceanothus that are part of the campus landscaping.
Yeah, so for our transects, we did them in 4 areas. One was manicured non-native lawn in the sort of entryway of the campus. 2 of them were on the slope, and then 1 was on the flat top area, so that's like the more undeveloped area. So within our transects, we only captured the arroyo lupine, but after the transects, we walked the entire campus with Dr. Maniaga, and we noted down some plants such as it was not California buckwheat, but a different buckwheat that's also native, and lemonade berry as well. So there are some native plants such as those that we didn't capture them in our transects, but we know they exist on the campus, and those are included in our report as well. But at least when we did our transects, the only thing that we actually captured within our sort of plots was the arroyo lupine.
Great, thank you. Yeah, looking forward to reviewing the full report, and hopefully we'll be able to put the other project to work as we explore that station. Out at the type, see what fits and stuff.
So this concludes our program for today. Before everyone rushes out to get the food and again, more coffee in the lobby, I just wanted to reiterate how absolutely staggering an accomplishment it is that our students have done here. That the work they put into these projects, which come to us as often loose ideas and concepts for ways that we could make the world and Los Angeles and California a better place, get transformed into these incredibly impactful projects. And that's wholly due to the work by our students and the oversight by our faculty and researchers here. And I really am so impressed by the work you've done. I'm so utterly blown away by the potential for the impacts that your projects can create. And you all should be immensely proud of what you've accomplished here. So thank you all again. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week. And please don't guys feel that it's on all of you.